Good evening. Good evening, friends, and welcome. My name is Annie Wilson. I'm proud to be your programming supervisor for the FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre. We're meeting today on a virtual platform, which offers an important moment for us to reground ourselves in physical place. So I'm asking us all now to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home, and the First People, Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit people of your place. The FirstOntario Performing Arts Centre is located in downtown St. Catharines, Ontario, on the shared traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and many other Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We offer our sincere gratitude and respect to their historic and continued stewardship of this land. We also acknowledge that Black, Indigenous, people of color, and 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples have been marginalized for centuries and more. It is our collective responsibility to take action for a better world that is free from oppression, discrimination, and racism. I am very proud that the Performing Arts Centre is actively working to bring our community together through the arts in a place of mutual understanding, empathy, and respect. Thank you. Thank you and welcome to Local Reflections on Racism, Art and Stories of Racialized Migrant Oppression. We have three incredible panelists here with us this evening to share reflections on the female refugee experience through art and stories. And I'm pleased to introduce our panel. We have Roshanak Jaberi, Artistic Director of Jaberi Dance Theatre, an incredible, and I cannot stress that enough, incredible Toronto-based company that creates contemporary and interdisciplinary political art. She's joined by Dr. Doris Rajan, who is the Director of Social Development at the Institute of Research Development on Inclusion and Society. And we also have Emily Kovacs. She is the fearless leader and executive director of the Niagara Folk Arts. She's graciously joined us this evening to moderate and to share in the conversation. This evening's talk is part of the online speakers series that is presented in partnership with Niagara Folk Arts, as well as the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association and us here at the Performing Arts Centre. We are in for a really awesome conversation this evening, if our pre-show chat was any indication. So I am now very pleased and honored to welcome Roshanak, Doris, and Emily. Thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome, Doris and Roshanak. What an amazing night to spend an hour with you. I wish that it was more than one. I wish that it was the whole evening. In so many ways, I feel like I know you, and I identify with all of the initiatives that you are undertaking. And in other ways, I want to learn more about you. I want to welcome our audience members. Thank you for spending the next hour with us. It is my absolute pleasure to moderate this evening and to have a very casual, sister-like, friend-like conversation with these two incredible women and talk about the role of the arts as it augments and supports and basically, gives life to advocacy, whether it's political or social change, to social issues in a way that no other platform or no other milieu can. As Annie had mentioned, I think you're in for a few wonderful teasers. The women who are here, they have done amazing and wonderful work in their own, both in the world of performing arts in dance theater, as well as in advocacy with regards to the Iris Institute that we'll delve into a little bit more. But without, before we go into details, or before we jump into details, I wanted to just introduce Roshanak Jaberi first to you. And I wanted to take a moment. I wonder, I'm assuming that you have read the introductions already, but I wanted to take a moment and highlight this quote unquote force to reckon with woman. She is an Iranian-born Canadian artist. She's a Dora nominated, I want to say 5 times Dora nominated choreographer and artistic director at the Jaberi Dance Theatre. She is also, which is a Toronto-based company that creates contemporary and interdisciplinary political art. She is an ISPA, which is the International Society of Performing Arts Global Fellow, and the recipient of the Chalmers Alt Fellowship. As I said, she's described as a force to reckon with, my favorite term. She has presented her work in Canada, US, and Europe. And Roshanak has a research-informed artistic practice that values collaboration, community, and risk-taking. Again, another 3 adjectives that I truly love. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from York University and has served on the board of directors of the Dance Umbrella of Ontario and the Toronto Arts Council Dance Committee. Welcome, Roshanak.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Equally excited and a tremendous pleasure to welcome Dr. Doris Rajan. Doris is the Director of Social Development at the Institute for Research and Development on Inclusion and Society, also known as IRIS. Beautiful name. She had a PhD from the University of Toronto and an MSW from Carleton University. She's involved in national and international social development and applied research initiatives largely focused on gender-based violence, access to justice, racialized migrant, Indigenous issues, and disability rights. Doris has taught community development courses at a variety of post-secondary institutions. She has written numerous training resources and advised national, international NGOs on how to conduct effective community-based research. Doris is also a theater and film artist. And I think this is where the interesting intersections of the friendship between Roshanak and Doris is beginning. So before we go into there, I want to frame tonight's conversation in the theme is how the arts as I mentioned to you, how the arts can be a tool, an advocacy tool in a way that no other genre can. But before we delve into that, perhaps I can ask you just a few, in a few words, perhaps I'll start with you, Roshanak. If you can use some of the highlights and that led to start, how did you start the Jaberi Dance Theatre and how did you get to where you are today?
Thank you so much for this conversation and for the lovely introduction. So I've been a performing artist and in the dance theater world for almost 20 years now. So I've been an independent artist, but my company was established in 2015 as a way to sort of allow me to create the work that I wanted to create and to pursue some of the collaborations that I was interested in.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And back to you, Doris. If you could let us know, what your path to work with the IRIS Institute, and how did you get to being with us here tonight?
Yeah, thank you as well for this evening. It's a great topic, and it's not often, the two worlds don't often come together. I think because I have inclinations in both kind of the social justice movement advocacy work and also in the theater and film world, it seemed upon meeting Roshanak, like it was a very unusual coming together, and in that those worlds tend to, for me, to be very compartmentalized. IRIS Institute is a national and an international social development and research institute. And we have recently, I would say in the last 6 years, actually a bit longer, been really using art as a social development tool. And primarily working with professional artists, and maybe Roshanak will talk a little bit more about that as well. So just because, as you said, Emily, it's such an important way of communicating communicating different experiences of marginalization, of oppression that may not be known to us. And even if they are known to us, helping us put names to it and identify our own experiences.
That's wonderful. And certainly I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And as I said, perhaps before we talk about framing the conversation about why art is such a powerful tool to raise awareness and transform attitudes and create social and political change. And, perhaps if we have time, we could also focus on challenges, on the various challenges in telling the stories of people's lived experiences. But I think that for the benefit of the audience, the best way to start is perhaps if we open with a short video on a production from the Jaberi Dance Theatre, and it's called No Woman's Land. And I think this is a collaborative initiative between the two of you. If you wanted to take a few minutes to set the theme up for us, and then perhaps after that, Annie, you can play the video. Roshanak or Doris, would you like to say anything before we play the video?
Sure. This production was a 3-year process of research all the way up to the final staging of the work. And it's based on true stories of women in refugee camps, and it captures the pre-migration journey of racialized women and experiences of gender-based violence. It was a beautiful collaboration with Doris and Doris's organization, who helped guide the research process and supported the story collection and the interviews. And we conducted a series of focus groups, which we'll talk about later on in the conversation. But so this is the trailer for the work, which premiered in 2019. And we're hoping planning to, if COVID permits, tour it in Ontario in 2022.
Wonderful. And Doris, anything on your end that you wanted to add or augment?
I think she framed it great, and it was really nice to have that time, 3 full years to work on this.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm sure that the audience is in for a treat. And just so you know, this performance, as I understand it from Annie and her wonderful team, is coming here in April of 2021. And I myself am looking forward to it already, just having seen the trailer. And I look forward to seeing further performances as well. So Annie, we'll give the floor to you if you want to cue it up and enjoy.
Hello, Baba. Baba, can you hear me? They took the women and girls, Baba. They took them all, hundreds of them. I don't know where they are. I will find them, Baba. I have to find them. Hello, Baba. Could you hear me? They are killing all the men. Tell them we need help. Hello.
Wow, powerful. I have to say, I listened to the trailer earlier today. And as I mentioned to both Roshanak and Doris at the pre-conversation, throughout the day, I just continued to hear "Hello, Baba" throughout in my voice. It just wouldn't leave me. And I think, I mean, the powerful emotions, even just in the trailer that came through, it is just so inviting, and the I don't know about the rest of the audience members, but for me I couldn't help but invite myself to want to know more about the story, want to know more, and actually truly feel the pain. So maybe this could be a good opportunity for us to talk about a little bit. You mentioned that this project took 3 years, and that you have had a lot of collaborative effort from Doris's work as well as yours. Can you tell us a little bit more about like what was the research component that went into it, and how do you find that talking to the individuals, or telling the stories of the people with the lived experiences, how do you take care of them in a way that you get the story, you get the beautiful meaning of the story, but you don't further traumatize the individuals who are retelling their story, and at the same time make sure that the audience actually gets it? How did that come about? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'll start off, and then Doris can sort of fill in the gaps with some of the research process. But basically, the original motivation for me to research this topic in particular was because I'm a first-generation refugee. I came to Canada with my family in 1986, and so around the time when there was a lot of sort of media coverage with the Syrian refugees, the experiences that they were going through, it was really resonating with me on a personal level. And I was following the stories, and I was feeling very inclined to use my art to basically sort of explore some of these experiences. But I also knew that my experience was very unique and very different from the ones that many of the ones that I was learning about. For example, my family didn't go through refugee camps, and so it was important for me to, while there was an alignment with the understanding of what that experience is like, there was an understanding that there's a varied, broad spectrum of experiences. So for me, it was really important to understand the deeper topic, and to be able to really speak to women who have had a variety of experiences with violence, with also resiliency. So that there was a lot of sort of stories of courage and resiliency and resistance, and it was a very layered and nuanced topic, and I'm still researching it, to be quite honest. That was just the beginning of my journey in terms of these stories. But so I began with really sort of getting to inform myself with the topic, and that included a whole number of things, from reading books to articles, watching films and documentaries, speaking to people that I personally knew who had lived through these experiences as refugees. And then I wanted to go further by holding, and this is where Doris came in, by holding focus groups, interviewing women who had very specific experiences of trauma. And with those particular focus groups, the importance was to connect with local facilitators who had established an existing relationship with the women, who could conduct the interviews, retain their anonymity, get their consent, create a safe space for them, and to allow them to basically share comfortably, because they had an established trust. So for those focus groups, actually, I wasn't present. And so when the interviews were conducted, that material was then translated into English because they were conducted in their own specific languages. And it was the transcriptions were passed on to me, and then that also helped to inform the creative process.
And that's wonderful to hear, and thank you for sharing your own personal experiences as well. And if I may, if I can be courageous enough to share, I also came as a newcomer to Canada. I was 16. I didn't come as a refugee, but I did experience almost 2.5 years of being away from my mom and being with my grandparents for, a 2.5 year period. So while I may not be able to identify with the pain of various trauma that other individuals who have gone through different traumatic experiences, to me, again, certainly the voice of the gentleman who said, I cannot find them, it certainly resonated with me. And from the experiences of the individuals that we support at our center, the Niagara Folk Arts Multicultural Centre, we have various art therapy programs, and as well as, mental health supports for individuals who are traumatized. We find that often sort of certain things are, I wouldn't call them necessarily triggers, but they're reminders of certain identifiers that just take you back to a certain moment. And we often hear from them as to how therapeutic and helpful it is to actually be able to find a safe space where they can talk about this, even if it just means someone who's sitting next to them who may not have gone through the same space, but they have had somewhat of a similar experience. So I've shared the trailer with some of the individuals at our center, and again, the overwhelming enthusiasm to look forward to something like this, because I think people overwhelmingly want to recognize themselves or want to recognize other people's journeys or migrations and experiences of trauma, and somehow not to validate it, but to somehow to find connectedness, right? And through that connectedness, find a way out towards healing. So thank you for taking the time and for doing all of the research to be able to really listen to the voices of the individuals who have gone through that. And perhaps, Doris, this would be your moment to talk about what was the contribution and what is the advocacy role of what you brought to the collaborative piece with regards to No Women's Land.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. We should also say that Dr. Shahrzad Mojab at the University of Toronto also contributed to sort of the more secondary research pieces. So supervised a literature review, but in a lot of the stuff, Roshanak was doing a lot of research on her own as well to complement that. But so we were sort of, as Roshanak outlined, more taking the lead on the primary research piece within sort of convening, identifying the women and getting sort of women leaders from the community to actually do the facilitation. And these are partners that Iris has worked with on a number of different projects over the years. But I think Emily, you talked a bit about this, I'm trying to think of how to best explain it, but the piece around truth and authenticity, I think, is really important here. And I think, taking that time to really create a safe environment, a comfortable environment where the supports are in place, where the participants, in this case, women, were able to feel free enough to talk, to open up about certain things, because there's also topics that, you often hear, I'm sure you've heard this a lot in your work, Emily, that some children of immigrants have never heard some of the stories or the experiences their parents have gone through because you simply just don't talk about it. And so we were really fortunate to have, really the strength was in the community-based facilitators who were able, as Roshanak said, in their own language, talk them, ask them the questions, ask them what they wanted to share, etc. And I think one of the biggest difference, again, because I can live in both worlds, if we were doing the research, if we were wanting to reach out to women to find out about gender-based violence as we were in this context, we would have been asking and looking for very different kinds of information. And I think that's something that's interesting in the artistic process, because I've done this also for a play I wrote. But in the dance piece and in the theater piece, there's similarities. But for example, you're looking for things that you wouldn't look for in a research project where you're doing community development, or you're trying to improve programs or develop some kind of, engagement piece. We were looking for information that wasn't necessarily all text or content, like what were the expressions on their faces when they said certain things? Where were the silences? What wasn't said, and how wasn't it said? And trying to get, and Roshanak, you could talk a bit about this, but trying to get a sense of movement and place. So because this was about refugee camps, she was really interested in, like, what's the movement? What's it like in a day? What's a day in a refugee camp? That kind of thing. And I think going into that process, as Roshanak said, there was also periods of a lot of joy that we got, like we were able to ensure that we weren't going to create and show back victims, that we were talking about, people who have experienced have a subjective experience. And I think that was really important. And I don't know if you remember, Roshanak, but I don't know if this actually made it into the show, but just when a group of women were singing political songs, like in the refugee camp, they were just, they would kind of look forward to their evening when they got together and sang in a circle. Things like that were really important to create the total environment, and to kind of ensure that we're not giving a very objective lens to the work that we're doing, that the people become real. I think one of the biggest things for us as researchers, and definitely Roshanak appreciates this, is that not to divorce the individual experience to the broader structural context of oppression, right? And I think what art can really do is that it can encode those kind of somatic, emotional, embodied experiences, how they're encoded in an individual, and play it back. But these relations happen in a broader context. And I think that's very important in guarding against kind of the displaying of victimhood and ensuring agency.
Wow, that's really wonderful. And I can assure you from our experiences, you're right. Many of the women that we support, it's very important and powerful and important for them to explain that they do not want to be seen as victim. And quite frankly, at the center, we often talk about how they are heroes because they exemplify extraordinary resilience. They exemplify extraordinary acts of courage that actually acts as as sort of a future resilience builder, right? So often women, I find, it's not that they're diminishing the experience, but they recognize that pain that they have gone through is sort of giving them some sort of fuel to be able to, migrate into a new experience, move that many miles across the ocean and, come and settle in Canada again. And, certainly at the center, we have, I would say right now, about 60% of our individuals that we are serving are individuals from Syria, and the majority of them are women. And often we hear that, and the camaraderie and the beautiful friendship that comes out of just the opportunity to be provided a safe space where some of these issues can be talked about without stigma, and some of these issues that can be talked about also without sort of any consequences that come out of that. And perhaps, I don't want to dive off topic, but some of the challenges that we've also seen, in the context of creating safe spaces and in the context of creating these opportunities is, again, as social advocates, we would love to see, be able to tell the stories in a way that is there. And also, it is in our interest for the larger community to understand the incredible resilience that these women represent. What we often find is that there's comfort in togetherness. There's comfort in finding anonymity within other fellow newcomers or immigrants. And perhaps even if there's mental health issues, or even if there's supports that would be definitely needed, we often find that migration from our safe space, let's say within folk arts, it's a difficult migration to go and now face into another world. It's a bit of a it's a contradiction of sorts in ways, because they themselves do feel resilient and ready to do that, yet they do express the need for support, but in their own terms, and only to people that they trust will they allow them in. And I find that again, through the experiences of artistic expressions at the center, we do art forums. I find that we get further in those types of conversations and those types of trusting relationships than in one-on-one therapy per se. I wonder if other types of research, or through the conversations, if you've noticed that, or how do you ensure that through the putting together of No Women's Land as well, to ensure that these sorts of vulnerabilities are protected and centering the voices are protected in a way that is always with consent. I know you talked about providing consent and all of those things. Were there any instances at any point where individual women asked for further, let's say, therapeutic support after this conversation, or were there any instances of that?
Yeah, actually, you mentioned early on in the conversation the male actor, his voice when he's calling out for his father. In one of the performances in Toronto, there was a family that was sitting in the back and watching the performance. And during that scene, I could hear, because I was in the audience in the back, and they were behind me, and I can hear something happening behind me. I wasn't sure what it was, but I later found out that they were really triggered by that scene, and they left the theater. They went in the lobby. And we had an on-site support worker there who was able to speak to them. And it turns out that I believe they had a family member, a brother, that was missing at that time, and his voice in the Arabic language just recalled them of that particular experience of having a missing person in their life. But what I found really powerful was that they chose to return to the theater and continue watching the piece. And that was a really powerful moment for me, because it just reminded me of the power of testimony and story. And when done responsibly, how important it is to have these stories on stage, even though they can be difficult content, as long as there is support provided, so that people, when they do get triggered, that they are not alone. But it is really important to have these stories told with them in the lead in terms of the process. And one of the things that I ensure that I do is to make sure that in terms of the collaboration of community, I bring them on into the process early on, so that it's not an afterthought, so that they can lead in the storytelling, they can guide the storytelling, they can control the way that their stories are basically told through the art. And as an artist, it's really a constant negotiation between, making sure that the stories are authentic and there's a level of integrity and ethics in the way that the stories are interpreted, but then taking some artistic freedom to be able to interpret those stories creatively.
Yeah, like beautiful, and thank you for putting that, highlighting that the role of the community support and the sort of counseling support or the trigger supports if and when those things happen, and certainly I can identify with that. We earlier on in November of 2019 we had a similar artistic performance that we put together in collaboration with Brock University and the Performing Arts Centre, as well as Pride Niagara. And it was a story, sort of an experiential story about identities. We called it Identities Relocated. It's about the stories of LGBTQ2S newcomers coming out, not only coming out as in their identity, but also coming to Canada. And it was told by students who were from the LGBTQ2S community, who are also newcomers themselves. And we did very much a similar expression. You know, we had a community agreement as to how we're going to participate in this, not only as part of the audience, but as part of the actors themselves. And then, of course, having the supports afterwards to be able to have them available. And of course, the very first time we had produced it, we had a similar experience to yours, where somebody walked out, and how important that was for us to be able to follow them and you know, just ask supportive questions. And we found out that yet again, what happened is, you know, we were anticipating that they were discomfort. They were, you know, they were discomfort. They had discomfort with the topic itself, right? That's some of our assumptions. And in fact, it turned out that they had family members who they know who are left behind, who are in fact in Colombia and other parts of the world that are not able to come out, right? And how that was a trigger for them feeling that sort of emotion for the family member. So certainly, as powerful a tool it is, we also have to make sure that we center the voices, and we center and support the voices that are part of that. And I really wanted to, you know, deeply appreciate the thought and the therapeutic support that you have thought about to be able to do this in the context of No Woman's Land, but also in the context generally in your work. And of course, for the audience, I'm not sure. Annie, if you see any comments or questions from the audience, I forgot to say that we welcome questions. If you have any thoughts or ideas on the topic, you're welcome to do that. I see there's a question from Rick. Have any of the women seen the show? And if so, what were their responses to it? I'm imagining these are women. If you're asking if these are women from the center, I'm going to say we're going to see them in April. And if you're asking about other women, then perhaps I'll give that to Roshanak and Doris. And have you had this performance given to individuals who have experienced similar trauma in the past?
Well, one thing we didn't share with you is that we made a really concentrated effort in this one, and then also in the show that I did in 2015, to make sure that the women that participated in the focus groups and the discussion groups, whose stories we were blending, were invited, you know, to come as guests, special guests to the performances. And so we had people like their community facilitator bring them or organize them, that and other. And that was really exciting on a number of levels, because these are people that traditionally would not go to a theater. So it was really wonderful to have a non-traditional audience. And I think No Woman's Land, there was a lot of community people there. Like just the sort of the diversity was incredible. But I would say definitely in the production that I did in 2015, at least 50% of the audience were the different people from the community that participated. And that's got to be like the most terrifying thing for show creators. I'll let you answer, but because they're the people you really want to make sure that you have been honest and you have been able to tell a story that's allowed you that, when you're talking about challenges, and Roshanak can talk more about this, but that balance between your own autonomy as an artist and your own interpretation to being truthful and authentic, and also making sure that you're doing it in a way that's not identifiable. I think that was really important for refugee women, was that they didn't want to be able to be sitting there and then somebody's story was so specific that you could tell who that was, how tight some of these communities are. But yeah, the reactions were incredible in the sense that if it's done right, and I think the developmental process is the most important thing, but if it's done right, then I think there is a feeling of pride and ownership of the story. If they're involved from the beginning, middle, and end in the process, there's a sense of that's my story, and like I own that and I gave that, so I think it was really important, really,
Yeah.
really, and the getting upset, it happened a couple of times, like, and this particular example, but I went and talked through the translator with the person, and I kept saying, if it's all right not to go back in, as Roshanak said, it's all right not to go back in. You can stay out, and absolutely wanted to go back in. It was so important for her to go back in and hear it. And it was not like she was doing it out of strength. She was doing it out of it. She needed to go back in and see the rest of it and to share with everybody, the whole audience, like that feeling of being kind of held. We heard, because we did quite an extensive evaluation, and we did hear that just the feeling of community that it created. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you. It almost sounds like a sort of a quasi-cathartic experience, as if somehow that creates that ownership and somehow that provides that. And we see that often, again, from women and some men as well. We've done one of the things that is similar, not quite exactly the same, but similar, is we've done a series called Faces of the Folk Arts, and within it, we've talked about also, individual experiences with mental health in our series of destigmatizing mental health, and of course these things are interrelated, and we often found that the participants who were there, of course, it was all done with consent, and the very similar experience to make sure that we protect individuals, and only, they only participate if they wish to. Somehow it provided that idea of some sort of a freeing experience, right? And we often found that there's some sort of there's some, like I said, a cathartic experience, almost like freeing, to say that I've gone through it. I can now actually say that the experience has happened, and somehow I can further distance myself from it. And we often hear this from women, which is wonderful to know. And again, thank you for the question. I see that there is another question from someone, I think it's Evangeline, who says, will No Women's Land be performed again? So outside of April of 2021, I guess the questions would be, where are you showing this next? What are the schedules look like? And what are the opportunities for individuals to see No Women's Land again?
Well, actually, the production was originally scheduled for March 2021, but because of the back-to-back lockdowns and the pandemic, it's now been rescheduled for March 2022. So it will be touring in Ontario, in St. Catharines, Kingston, Markham, and Brantford in March 2022. We have another project coming up in April, which we'll talk about.
Okay, my apologies. I mixed these dates together. So No Women's Land will be in April 2022. And perhaps, we would continue to work with Colleen, Annie, and Sarah at the Performing Arts Centre to keep the issue alive, and we certainly will amplify this for you. And for anyone in the audience who is interested, please stay tuned. We'll make sure that we give ample notice to this. And perhaps we take I'm cognizant of the time, we have about 15 minutes left. And like I said, we just went with the organic experience, and that's how things happen. Perhaps we can take a few minutes to talk about what is coming up in April of 2021, and what other collaborative or individual initiatives that you are doing together or individually that you think the audience would love if they have already loved No Women's Land.
Sure. In April 2021, I'm sharing a new project. It's an augmented reality photography exhibit that will be launched in April in St. Catharines and Kingston. And it's basically a photo series that is based on the true story of a woman, a nurse, a mother named Irma, who was forcibly disappeared in El Salvador. She was kidnapped and during the Civil War. And so this, her daughter, Anna, will be sharing her story of the events themselves, and also her journey after that particular event, after her mother was captured, her journey to find her remains, but also to seek justice for her mother. So this is a short documentary that's also, it's in two different forms, a short documentary and an augmented reality photography exhibit, where the public can view the images, and using their mobile devices, they can experience the images come to life and watch and listen to the story.
That's beautiful. So that will be coming in April. Look forward to that already. Anything from your end, Doris, that you wanted to highlight? And then there's one more question from the audience.
Well, I don't know if we disclose, Roshanak, our Dialogues from the Edge initiative that we're putting together, kind of trying to get the money together for I don't know how you would explain it. It's basically a living exhibition that we're hoping to be able to have at the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. And it is, we're just sort of in the developmental phase of it, but we have talked to the museum, who's expressed an interest, and now it's going to have different pieces to it, like a combination of performances, short performance installations, and some visual art as well, focusing on, again, these kinds of experiences. We call it Dialogues from the Edge because we're looking at the margins moving in terms of different experiences of marginalized peoples in Canada. And the piece that I'd be involved in is going to be very historically based. So looking at sort of the histories and the herstories of particular populations in Canada, migrants, Black African peoples, diaspora, and Indigenous people.
Beautiful. And do you have a timeline as to when you think that will come together, or will you keep us
we'll keep you informed.
At the edges of our seats?
It's going to be a long process because we really want to do quite a intensive commissioning across the country. We really want it to be a national piece. So looking for talent right across the country to participate in it in various ways. And I don't know, Roshanak, if you just wanted to jump in here and say, like, what in terms of what you're thinking. We haven't gone that far. We've got the concept for sure, and there's a lot of excitement because they haven't done anything that's taking a human rights approach at looking at these stories. That's an actual living exhibition, so it's bigger than they've ever had to been proposed to them. So I think it will take at least 3 years to develop.
I would imagine some of the ethical considerations as well, because I would imagine you want people with lived experience to ensure that, again, all of those safe spaces are created for them. I can't wait. Mm-hmm. And Roshanak, I don't know if I jumped in too early. Please feel free to add anything that you wanted to do about the Dialogues from the Edge.
Yeah, no, I think Doris pretty much captured it. Both of us will be creating new work, new live theater and dance performance, site specific. And then the bigger context is the actual event, which is the Dialogues on the Edge event. So there's a lot of moving parts. It's an exciting opportunity to convene artists with scholars and activists and community and really sort of get into a really stimulating conversation around the intersection of all our works. What is our role in community? What is our role in social justice? And what better way to bring us all together through an event like this, which is also integrating art.
Yes, and it speaks to the power of collaborative different milieus, right? In terms of how much richer the the product becomes when you have all different disciplinary fields collaborating and working towards the same goal. So, I cannot be more impressed and in awe of everything that you do, and you can tell that I will be following you, and I will be looking forward to all of the beautiful initiatives that you put together, not only in advocacy from the Iris Institute, but also in terms of the actual lived experience performing arts. And I think, again, from the bottom of my heart, and I can speak on behalf of my team and the individuals that we support, we want to thank you for paying attention to this not easy and often complicated and very, very complex issue to navigate, because it is you are dealing with triggering issues, you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with individualized and sometimes generational trauma, and it's not an easy topic to carry. And it also is we have to make sure that we do it justice. And from the sounds of it, from the careful planning and to all of the environmental scanning, I can tell that you both have had given not only your hearts and minds, but all of your talent that you can do to this. So I want to just take a moment and acknowledge and thank you for that. There is another question from the audience. I think this one is coming from Sarah. Thank you for sharing your amazing work and important stories. Can you speak to the process and creative collaborations in staging the piece? I believe this is to, again, No Woman's Land. Feel free to take it away, anyone who wants to address it.
Yeah, I think we sort of touched on it a little bit, but I think for me as an artist, it was for any topic that I'm exploring through my art. It's important to know what you know and important to know what you don't know. And I think for me, it's very helpful to collaborate and work with people who I would say are experts in their field. And Doris is one of those people. This is, she's been doing this work for 30 something years. I don't want to give it away, Doris, but but it's important because the learning is just continuous, and for me, that's an exciting part of my work, is to work with people that really can help me deepen my understanding. And so, before we even started the research, there was so much dialogue between Doris and I, and so many suggestions, also with Dr. Sharzad Mojab, who also was advising in terms of directing me and contextualizing my questions before I even met with my artistic team to be able to translate some of that information to them, because that's the other piece. It's the research that I do and is one part, the initial phase. And then I have to communicate all that to my creative team, my artists. And I took actually quite a bit of time. We did a residency for about a week at the very beginning, just to sort of talk and share the research and ask questions. And then for every rehearsals that we had, there was a lot of opportunity to continue in the dialogue and questioning. And we would often pause and stop and address some things that would come up and then continue. So for me, that was an important piece in the development process to make sure that I wasn't rushing through that part and creating space for my artists to also ask questions and for us to sort of like deconstruct things and to be able to talk to each other and ask each other questions in the process that helped our learning. So once the artists got on their feet and we started creating, it was so easy to capture images and the creativity was just flowing out because they already had that embodiment of the information and the material. So and that's really a big part was Doris's support and the research team that really helped guide me in that process.
That's wonderful to hear. And if you had so perhaps if audience members are listening and they're getting their own creative juices ready, if you had to redo this again, what learnings, what lessons would you what would you do differently, or what lessons would you say, what advice would you have to someone else who wants to do something similar to this collaborative effort? If you had to do this process again, what are best practice examples that you could pass on as a sort of a big sister to a little sister?
I think the biggest thing was for me you have to really love this kind of work. It's a very different kind of art making, and it comes with a lot of responsibility, a lot of challenges, it's a big emotional journey as well, making sure you're doing justice, but you're also being creative. And again, as I said, it's like constant dialogue with self and negotiation with self, and so you really have to be passionate about the issues that you're exploring. It's because it takes a toll on you, and it's a big responsibility, and it's a big investment, time and energy to be able to do it as responsibly as possible. And mistakes will be made, but it's being able to recognize it and being comfortable enough to change course and shift when you need to, and not being so stuck on the creative part of it that it starts to compromise the intention of the work.
Mm. And where, if I can ask, if this is not too personal, where do you go to tap into that creative fountain when things get really difficult? So how would you replenish that, and how would you do that? And I can certainly see that this is very intentional for both of you. How do you recoup? How do you regenerate yourself from the very intense and heavy work?
Doris, do you want to take?
Well, I just wanted to add, and I hope this is a little bit related to your question, Emily, but I think one of the most important things around like kind of lessons learned and how to do the process right is to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, that you are really, I think Roshanak was speaking a bit to this, but that you are committed to the issues and you center the women, and not the art. And I think a lot of the problems, especially when you're working with professional artists, I mean, it's different when you're doing something where, the community is actually part of the performance or whatever, the art making. But there becomes a distance, like once that process is over, the research process, then there's a distance where then, in this case, Roshanak took this, having kind of this picture and then working with the artist to make it come alive. But I think it was really important that she chose artists that she knew had the commitment to the women as well, and to the issues, some with lived experience, some without, but really just that we're because sometimes there's papers written on this about artists working with communities and a sense of entitlement and going in and taking, and and then making it something that's outside of what it was. And I think that is probably the strongest lessons learned, like objective of the work, is to constantly be grounded. So I guess with the self-care stuff, I think if you are grounded, you're constantly reminding yourself why you're doing this work, right? Like what, that when you, like when I just saw that clip, for example, that was not just, I could see it so clearly who that was, whose story that was, who we were, and so they're real living people, and it's making that kind of staying grounded in that. I think personally anyways, I think that's how you take care, because you're being truthful and you're taking that responsibility very seriously.
That's very powerful. And you're right. We have said it again and again, and you both have alluded to it, that you're centering the person and not the art. And the art is really just a tool through which the person is supported, and the story comes out because of that. I want to thank you both. We have barely a minute left. I have so many more questions. I'm going to respect everyone's time though. And again, I just wanted to thank you for your dedication, for your emphasis on amplifying migrant and women's stories that are often very difficult to hear, tell, and even more difficult to perform. So again, thank you for your trailblazing work. I will be following you, and I'm sure many of the audience members will be as well. And we look forward to not only April 2021, but also for the augmented reality part, but also for April 2022, when we are going to be actually looking forward to watching No Woman's Land. Thank you for your dedication, and thank you for the audience for the engaging and thoughtful questions. And with that, I will hang up my moderator hat and give the podium back to Annie. And thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night, St. Catharines and Niagara.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doris and Roshanak.
Well, that was something. Thank you so much, Roshanak, Doris, and Emily, for your sharing and for your deep reflections this evening. My programming colleague, Sarah, and I, we had the opportunity to see No Woman's Land in 2019. It is powerful, it's deeply moving, it's heart-wrenching at times, and it's certainly heart-opening all at the same time. And we have been working with Roshanak to bring that piece to St. Catharines ever since. The plan was for the piece to arrive here pretty much next week. But for obvious reasons, we will be postponing until March of 2022. And in the meantime, we will be announcing that augmented reality photography exhibit that Roshanak was speaking about. We will be announcing that shortly and sharing that in April. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Ontario Arts Council and Ontario Presents for supporting our collaboration with Jaberi Dance Theatre. We're very grateful also to the Canada Council and the Department of Canadian Heritage for their ongoing support of our programming and our work at the Centre. This online speakers series is a collaboration with Niagara Folk Arts and the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association. We will be back in the spring with another session. In the meantime, please visit FirstOntarioPAC.ca to keep in the loop. And in the meantime, until we see each other again, it's been a great pleasure to share this evening with you, and I ask you all to take care. Thank you so much.